When the world thinks something is over, it often isn't. It's just paused, hanging in the space between a setback and a comeback. People around you may say, it's done, or you've had your chance, or worse, maybe it just wasn't meant to be. And when we hear those voices enough times, we begin to internalize them. We begin to mistake delay for denial, resistance for rejection, and failure for finality. But here's the truth, none of those people, none of those moments, none of those obstacles get to declare your finish line. Only you do. We live in a world that's quick to label, quick to judge, and even quicker to quit. But your journey isn't a headline and your dream isn't disposable just because someone else couldn't see its value. What they see as the end might only be the middle. What they call a loss may simply be the part where you gather strength, not give up. People love conclusions because they bring closure, but life isn't a tidy movie. It's messy, unpredictable, and full of chapters that only make sense once you've turned a page. And that's where your power lies. The moment you accept someone else's definition of failure, you hand over the pen. You give them authorship over your story. But what if you never did that? What if you took the pen back and said, no, this isn't where my story ends. This is just where the plot thickens. Because that's the moment you reclaim your momentum. That's when you shift from being acted upon to being the one who acts. It's easy to give in to the idea that failure means finality. We're conditioned to think that once we fall, we're not supposed to get back up. That trying again after rejection is a sign of desperation, not determination. But look closer. Every person who has ever created something extraordinary, every leader, every athlete, every inventor, every dreamer has had one thing in common. They refuse to let anyone else define the end. They refuse to accept failure as the last word. There's something deep in the human spirit that resists being told, you can't. But the truth is sometimes the loudest voice saying, you can't, is our own. It's that internal critic, shaped by years of conditioning, echoing back every doubt, every fear, every past mistake. It says, you've tried enough. It says, this is embarrassing. It says, why keep going? But that voice is not your truth. It's your test. That's the moment you either back down or break through. That's where your grit shows up. The thing is, most people don't fail because they're not capable. They fail because they believe they're finished before they've truly begun. And that belief, that mental surrender, is what makes the difference between those who merely dream and those who deliver. What if the thing you've been chasing is still out there waiting, not because it's out of reach, but because you haven't crossed the bridge between persistence and breakthrough? What if every failure was just feedback, every delay a design, and every rejection a redirection towards something more aligned, more powerful, more you? Imagine looking at your goals, not as ticking clocks, but as timeless missions. Not everything great happens quickly. In fact, the most meaningful accomplishments are often the ones that required the most resistance. Diamonds aren't formed in comfort. Strength isn't forged in ease. And the life you're capable of building won't be handed to you. It will be earned through the relentless refusal to quit, even when it's dark, even when it's quiet, even when nobody's watching and nothing seems to be working. That's when it matters most, because people will forget your failures, but they will never forget your resilience. They won't remember how many times you fell. They'll remember that you kept standing. They'll see that when others walked away, you walked forward. And not just once, but again and again and again. Every time you rise, you send a message, not just to the world, but to yourself. You tell yourself, I'm not done. And that's what truly matters. Not their opinions, not the scoreboard, not the missed shots or the lost deals or the closed doors. What matters is that your fire didn't go out, that you didn't let the world shrink your spirit, that you didn't confuse a bad day with a bad destiny. Because endings are not absolute. They are choices, decisions, moments in time when someone somewhere declares that enough is enough. But unless that someone is you, unless that decision is yours, it isn't over. Not yet, not ever. Failure is one of the most misunderstood elements of success. We grow up being told that failure is something to be avoided, something to be ashamed of, a sign that we're not good enough. In school, failure is punished. In society, it's ridiculed. In our own minds, it often becomes a source of deep insecurity and fear. But what if failure isn't a dead end at all? What if failure is simply part of the path, not the end of it? Success is never a straight line. It's messy. It's unpredictable. It's filled with moments of doubt, confusion, and frustration. The most powerful breakthroughs in human history didn't come from perfect runs. They came after countless setbacks, rejections, and so-called failures. Yet, the reason they're remembered is because someone refused to stop at the point most people give up. Someone recognized that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the bridge to it. Every time you fail, you learn something that you couldn't have discovered any other way. It teaches you what doesn't work, what you need to change, how you need to grow. It strips away illusion and reveals truth. It humbles you. It sharpens you. It builds in you a resilience that no textbook, seminar, or motivational quote ever could. But only if you stay with it. Only if you look at failure not as a wall, but as a mirror. Because that mirror doesn't reflect who you are permanently. It reflects where you are temporarily. Failure shows you the parts of yourself that are still under construction. That's not something to hide. That's something to honor. Because every champion was once a contender who didn't yet have the skills. Every master was once a beginner who stumbled through their first attempts. They failed. They failed often, but they learned how to fail forward. The reason failure feels final is because we've been trained to associate it with loss. Loss of status, loss of confidence, loss of identity. But the truth is, failure doesn't take anything away from you unless you allow it to. What it actually does is strip away the false sense of security. It shakes your ego. It makes you question yourself. And in that space of discomfort, something real has the opportunity to grow, something far stronger than the illusion of success. There is no person who has achieved anything meaningful who hasn't been brought to their knees by failure. Look into the lives of the greats, the innovators, the athletes, the leaders, the artists, and you'll see the same thread: massive failure. Over and over, sometimes in public, sometimes in private, but always followed by a decision. The decision to keep going, the decision to rise, the decision to see failure not as a stop sign, but as a signal to adjust the approach and try again. The fear of failure keeps more people stuck than failure itself ever could. People don't take risks, not because they doubt their dream, but because they fear the fall. But here's the paradox: if you avoid failure, you also avoid growth. If you avoid mistakes, you also avoid mastery. The only way to become great at anything is to first be willing to be bad at it. And being bad at something doesn't mean you're a failure. It means you're in the process. We live in a culture obsessed with outcomes, trophies, titles, results. But the people who get those things understand that failure is baked into the process. They've trained their minds to see setbacks as feedback. They've learned that a lost game can teach you more than 100 wins. They've discovered that being told no isn't a rejection of your worth, it's a redirection of your path. And so the question becomes, how do you respond when failure shows up? Do you shrink back? Do you hide? Do you internalize it and let it define you? Or do you lean into it, extract its lessons, and use it as fuel for your next attempt? Because that's the real test, not whether you fail, but what you do next. You can be proud of your failures, not because you fell short, but because you showed up. You tried. You gave something of yourself. You stepped into the unknown. Most people never even do that. Most people live their whole lives trying to avoid the very thing that would make them grow. But you stepped in. You took the risk. That alone puts you in a category of people who are willing to evolve. Every failure holds within it the seed of progress. But seeds only grow when you keep tending to them. If you walk away, you never see what could have bloomed. But if you stay, if you commit to learning, adjusting, and moving forward, those seeds can become something unshakable. Failure isn't a signal to retreat. It's an invitation to rise. It's proof that you're in motion, that you're not standing still, that you're daring to build something that matters. And that kind of courage, the courage to try and fail and try again, will carry you further than perfection ever could. There will always be voices, loud, relentless voices, that tell you what you can't do. Some of them wear the mask of concern. Others speak from cynicism, envy, or their own limitations. They will question your ability, your vision, your timing, your worth. They will analyze your path with skeptical eyes, pick apart your ambition, and cast doubt over every move you make. Some will do it out of fear. Some will do it to feel better about not chasing their own dreams. But all of them have one thing in common: they don't live your life. They don't carry your vision. They don't feel your fire. Only you do. What drives you is not up for debate. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't require applause. Your hunger to become, to overcome, to grow, that is personal. That is yours. And that kind of drive, the kind that starts from within and refuses to die, is more powerful than any amount of noise coming from the outside. External doubt is temporary. It's based on perception, opinions, and assumptions. People judge you based on what they can see, but they can't see your grit. They can't see the sleepless nights, the quiet tears, the relentless hours behind closed doors. They can't see the vision you hold in your heart, the one that wakes you up in the morning and won't let you quit even when you're exhausted. They only see the surface, but it's not the surface that builds greatness. It's the depth. Your inner drive is the engine that pushes you forward when everything around you is screaming to stop. It's the force that carries you through resistance, through fatigue, through failure. It whispers, keep going. When others say, give up, it reminds you that you were built for more, even when the world says you've done enough or gone too far. That internal voice, when nurtured and trusted, becomes unshakable. But there's a danger in listening too closely to doubt, especially when it comes dressed as reason. Sometimes it comes from people you love, sometimes from those who have influence, sometimes from your past experiences that still echo in your mind. It can be subtle, a raised eyebrow, a hesitation, a warning disguised as wisdom. But over time, if you let that doubt take root, it can start to cloud your clarity. It can make you question what you already know deep inside. That's why inner drive matters so much, because it becomes your compass, your anchor, your truth. No one else is going to wake up every day and fight for your dream. No one else is going to understand the lengths you're willing to go for it. They're not supposed to. It's not theirs. It was given to you for a reason. And the responsibility is yours to protect it from the opinions of those who weren't called to carry it. The strongest people aren't the ones who never face doubt. They're the ones who choose to act in spite of it. They don't ignore fear. They don't pretend the criticism doesn't sting, but they refuse to let those things determine the outcome. They put more weight on their inner fire than on external friction. They move forward not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Because something inside of them says, this matters, and I won't stop until I see it through. Think about every major leap in history, every radical innovation, every world-changing idea. At some point, someone laughed at it. Someone doubted it. Someone said it was impossible. But someone else, someone who believed more in their own vision than in public opinion, pushed forward anyway. That's the difference. That's the separation line between ordinary and exceptional, between settling and striving, between a life dictated by fear and one driven by purpose. And the beautiful truth is this inner drive doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to make a scene or prove anything. It just has to be consistent. You don't need to scream your ambitions from rooftops. You don't have to defend your dreams to those who don't understand. You simply need to keep showing up. Keep doing the work. Keep aligning your actions with your purpose. There's a quiet power in persistence, a fire that doesn't flash, it burns steady. That's what inner drive looks like. It's not about chasing attention. It's about chasing alignment. It's about listening to that part of yourself that knows what you're capable of and refusing to let anyone else turn the volume down on that voice. Let them doubt. Let them question. Let them misunderstand. Because while they're watching, you're working. While they're talking, you're building. While they're hesitating, you're progressing. And every step forward fueled by your own conviction creates a momentum they can't measure and a strength they can't stop. Talent is impressive. Skill is admirable. Intelligence is respected. But none of these are more powerful than persistence, because persistence is the quiet force that keeps moving when everything else wants to stop. It's not glamorous. It's not always seen. It doesn't win awards or get applause in the moment, but it's what separates those who try from those who transform. Most people give up not because they lack ability, but because they lack stamina. They stop because the results didn't come fast enough. They retreat because the road was harder than expected. They convince themselves that maybe it wasn't meant to be when things don't go according to plan. But the ones who break through, the ones who achieve what others only dream about, are not the ones who had the easiest path. They are the ones who refuse to turn back. Persistence is not the same as motivation. Motivation is a spark, a burst, a moment. It comes and goes. It's affected by mood, environment, energy. Persistence is different. Persistence doesn't care if you feel like it. It shows up regardless. It's rooted in commitment, not emotion. When motivation fades, persistence keeps going. When inspiration is nowhere to be found, persistence puts its head down and does the work anyway. It's easy to get excited at the beginning. Every goal feels possible when you're just starting. The vision is clear, the energy is high, and the obstacles haven't shown up yet. But what happens when the novelty wears off? When the grind sets in? When you failed 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, and still haven't seen the breakthrough, that's the moment where most people step off the track. That's the moment when doubt whispers louder than desire. And that's exactly where persistence becomes the game changer. The people who persist have made a decision that goes deeper than feelings. They've decided that what they're building is worth the pain, worth the repetition, worth the sacrifice. They're not waiting for the perfect time or the right mood. They're not chasing results. They're building character. Because every time you persist in the face of resistance, you strengthen the part of yourself that can't be shaken. Greatness is never built in a straight line. It's carved through detours, setbacks, and reroutes. But the ones who make it to the other side aren't necessarily the fastest or the strongest. They're the ones who just kept showing up. Day after day, year after year, they kept trying. They kept learning. They kept adjusting. While others quit, they endured. While others looked for shortcuts, they stayed the course. The truth is, persistence is rarely praised while it's happening. No one claps for the 3rd attempt. No one celebrates the night you stay up late working on the same problem again. No one sees the hours you put in when progress feels invisible. But every one of those moments counts. Every hour compounds. Every step adds up. Persistence is a long game, and it's the one that wins. Sometimes you won't even realize how much you've grown until you look back. It's only after the dust settles that you see how far you've come. Not because you leapt, but because you kept moving inch by inch. The road was never meant to be easy. But it's in the struggle that you develop the strength to hold what you're working toward. It's important to understand that persistence isn't blind repetition. It's not doing the same thing over and over while ignoring the result. It's about staying committed while staying open, adjusting your methods while holding tight to your mission, knowing when to pivot without quitting altogether. Persistence requires awareness. It requires strategy. It requires the ability to keep going and keep learning at the same time. There will be days when you want to quit, days when the dream feels out of reach, days when progress is so slow it feels like it's stopped. Those are the defining days. That's where the foundation is built. If you only work when it's easy, you'll only get results when it's convenient. But if you persist through the hard, through the quiet, through the unseen, you will create something no one can take from you. In a world that glorifies speed, persistence teaches patience. In a culture obsessed with instant results, persistence teaches depth. It's not about how quickly you can get there. It's about how deeply you're willing to commit. Because anything worth building will test you. It will stretch you. It will ask you again and again, how badly do you want this? And every time you answer with action, every time you keep going when it would be easier to stop, you're proving that your dream is real, not because it came easy, but because you never walked away from it. There's something powerful about the moment right after you've fallen. Not because the fall feels good. It doesn't. It hurts. It's disorienting. It shakes your confidence and makes you question everything you thought you were certain of. But what makes that moment powerful isn't the pain. It's the potential. Because that space, that breath between falling and deciding whether to rise again, holds the spark of something life-changing. That moment carries the possibility of a comeback. Comebacks don't require applause. They don't need fanfare or attention. Most of them begin in silence, in private, in the shadow of failure. They're born in the dark when you're sitting with your disappointment, when everything in you is tired, and yet something in you whispers, try again. And that whisper, that tiny flicker of belief, can be the beginning of everything. People often imagine comebacks as grand gestures, something cinematic, something dramatic. But most of the time, a comeback starts with something simple, a decision, a step, a small act of defiance against the part of you that wants to stay down. And it doesn't take 1,000 steps to change your direction. It only takes one more try, one more choice to keep moving forward, no matter how slowly, no matter how unsure. It's easy to feel like you're too far gone, like too much time has passed, like too many chances have already been wasted. But that's an illusion created by discouragement. The truth is there is no expiration date on growth, no statute of limitations on dreams. Every new moment is a blank page, and the power to write a different story is always in your hands if you're willing to pick up the pen again. What holds most people back from a comeback isn't a lack of talent or opportunity. It's the belief that the last failure was final. They misread the ending. They thought the rejection was permanent. They mistook delay for defeat. But defeat is not what happens when you fall. It's what happens when you decide to stop getting back up. And that decision is never forced on you. It's always yours to make. When everything falls apart, there's a voice that says, "See, this is proof you weren't good enough." That voice will list your flaws, replay your worst moments, and magnify your mistakes until they feel like your identity. But there's another voice, often quieter, more subtle, and harder to hear, the voice that says, "You've come too far to quit now." That voice doesn't shout. It waits. It waits for the moment when you're ready to listen, not to your fear, but to your fight. Your comeback begins the second you decide that what's behind you doesn't have to define what's ahead of you. It begins when you look at your failures, not with shame, but with resolve. Every setback carries a lesson, every fall a new understanding. You may not have chosen the circumstances, but you always get to choose your response. And that choice is everything. There are people who will doubt your return. Some may even laugh at the idea of it. That's okay. They don't know what you're made of. They don't know the strength that's been built in the quiet, the courage that's been formed through adversity. What looks like a breaking point to others can become a turning point for you. What seems like the end can actually be the most important beginning of your life. A comeback doesn't require perfection. It doesn't mean you have all the answers or that the path will be smooth from here. It simply means you haven't let the past take away your power to choose again. It means you're willing to rise with your scars, to stand with your doubts, to walk forward with uncertainty, but walk forward anyway. That is the essence of resilience, not having it all figured out, but refusing to let failure write the final chapter. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is show up for yourself when no one else does, to put one foot in front of the other when you don't see the full path yet, to believe, even if only a little, that you still have something left inside you worth fighting for, because the truth is you do. And that belief, however small it feels, can grow, one try at a time. The distance between failure and triumph is often much smaller than it seems. It's not always about massive changes or breakthroughs. Sometimes it's about showing up one more day, making one more call, taking one more step, trying one more time, because you never know which try will be the one that tips the scale, the one that unlocks the door, the one that finally shifts everything you've been building toward. That's why the next attempt always matters, not because success is guaranteed, but because without it, nothing changes. Trying again doesn't just move you closer to your goal, it reclaims your power. It says, I'm still here, I'm not finished. I still believe something greater is possible. And sometimes that belief alone is what changes the game entirely. So when the world tells you it's over, when the setbacks pile up, the critics get louder, and your own mind starts to wonder if it's worth it. Remember this, the story isn't finished until you say it is. You are the author of your own future, and every moment you choose to try again, you take the pen back. Failure is not the end, it's a teacher. Doubt is not the truth, it's a challenge. And persistence, raw, steady, unshakable persistence, is the force that moves mountains, rewrites endings, and builds legacies. It doesn't matter how many times you've been knocked down. What matters is that you rise one more time than you fall. Because your comeback, your breakthrough, your moment, it's never lost. It's just waiting for you on the other side of your next try. Nothing is over until you stop trying. And as long as there's breath in your body, effort in your hands, and fire in your heart, you are not done. You're just getting started.